RFK Jr., he had hinted a couple weeks ago that he was thinking about running for president. And now it has actually been confirmed that he is running for president. He is going to primary challenge Joe Biden, and he is running through the Democratic Party. Now, you guys know how I feel about that. I think if he's going to run, he should run as an independent. I think that would be a lot better. Let's just be honest. But we now have two people primary challenging Joe Biden. And honestly, I think more may come. But I want to go ahead and I want to we're going to start with the Cash App story first. Well, no, we can do it. We do what we can do. Let me go back to what I was going to do. Hold on one second. We can just go ahead and start with the RFK story. I'll come back to the Cash App one. But I want to go ahead and play the announcement. And then I want to get into how RFK Jr. is already being smeared. Now, he is somewhat of a controversial figure. You do have to understand that. Some people do see him as a conspiracy theorist. He's had a lot of criticism about the mandates and about the lockdowns. He is a different type of Kennedy. He is not like the other Kennedys that have run for office before. And there's a lot happening here. So let's go ahead and get into this announcement video here.
Jr., descendant of one of America's most famous political families, is running for president. The 69-year-old Democrat filed a statement for candidacy with the Federal Election Commission. With this, a challenge to U.S. President Joe Biden has emerged from within his own party. Biden himself has not yet formally announced his candidacy for a second term, and his approval ratings have nonetheless declined in recent months.
I just want to chime in here for just a second because it was announced that Joe Biden was supposed to announce in April. It's April 7th. We still have a couple of weeks left to go, but it is interesting that Joe Biden has not announced yet.
Robert Kennedy is the nephew of former President John F. Kennedy and the son of his brother, Robert F. Kennedy. He's a best-selling author and environmental lawyer. But Kennedy's campaign for a Democratic nomination to the White House is being viewed as a long shot by many. Last month, Kennedy said on Twitter that he was considering running for the top position.
That is right. I don't know what they did here. I think they were stalling for some reason.
Self-help author Marianne Williamson is also running in the Democratic race.
So there's a problem here because Marianne Williamson, she's running. We've talked about her foreign policy takes. She has moved on some of those issues a little bit. But now you have someone that is primary challenging Joe Biden that has heavily criticized the lockdowns, that has heavily criticized mandates. And this is one of the reasons why I think he should run as an independent, because RFK Jr. could appeal to some of those independents. He might also appeal to some people on the right because of his criticism about the lockdown and the mandates. We don't know what's going to happen. But I caught this early on because a friend of mine sent this to me. I want to share this as well. Before everybody started talking about it, I caught this early on. Ladies and gentlemen, you will be so proud of me, I think. I tweeted this out because, see, this is the FEC. This is actually where people will file if they're going to run for president. And I shared this on April 5th. I said, according to the FEC, it looks like Robert F. Kennedy is officially running for president. And if you look here, you'll see I took a screenshot of the form and it says statement of candidacy. There's his name there. And you have to put your address, I guess, his identification number. And this is the piece here, the party affiliation, Democratic Party. That's how I knew he was running through the Democratic Party. Office sought, president. And then here it says designation of principal campaign committee. So it looks like his campaign committee is going to be based in South Walpole, Massachusetts. It's interesting because he doesn't live in Massachusetts. He lives in California, but that is where his base is going to be. I went on to say he's running through the Democratic Party and not as an independent candidate. So there is that. Now, how did people respond to this? Colin sent this meme, the roll your eye meme. He was not feeling it. Yepek said, I like that he's suing the government, Fauci and all that, but I wouldn't vote for him to be president. Sarah Jackson said, exciting. Caitlin said he should. Toku said, key takeaway, electoral politics is still a waste of time. Some people said, interesting. The Snow Himbo said, oh, this is going to be good. And this is interesting from Michelle. Michelle said, we're just recycling families generation after generation in the U.S. government power. That was an interesting take. Brooke said, this is actually really big because it's a challenge to a sitting Democrat president. This just doesn't happen. Well, except for when Ted Kennedy did it, contra Jimmy Carter. So I wanted to show you that so you can see just some of the responses from people about how they feel about this. And then this one here from Amin says, well, bye-bye, Marianne Williamson. They are different on certain policies. But as you can imagine, mainstream media is already starting to smear Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which we knew this was coming. So let me go ahead and cue that up. Now, Rising covered this. I want you to hear their take about RFK Jr. running for president and the smears that are coming his way.
Jake Tapper called Robert F. Kennedy Jr. an anti-vaccine quack during coverage of his bid for president yesterday. Let's watch.
This just into CNN. Anti-vaccine quack Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has filed paperwork with the Federal Election Commission to run for president as.
So you see what they're doing? They're calling him a quack. I told you, I knew this was going to happen. Some people are referring to him as a conspiracy theorist, a quack, etc. They're smearing him the same way that they did Marianne Williamson. They would smear anybody who is going to primary challenge Joe Biden and anyone who is going to point out some problems that we have in the economy right now. Anyone who goes against the mainstream narrative.
As a Democrat, in launching his presidential bid, Kennedy is the latest in a long line of family members to enter politics. So far, only Marianne Williamson, who last month launched her second long shot campaign, has entered the Democratic primary against Biden. Kennedy is such a healthcare menace. In 2019, even his cousins wrote an op-ed criticizing his anti-science views on life-saving vaccines.
Now, yesterday, Kennedy slammed the Fed's new FedNow central bank digital currency set to launch in July. Quote, CBDCs grease the slippery slope to financial slavery and political tyranny. While cash transactions are anonymous, a CBDC will allow the government to surveil all our private financial affairs. The central bank will have the power to enforce dollar limits on our transactions, restricting where you can send money, where you can spend it, and when money expires.
This is important because that's the next story that we're going to discuss tonight about FedNow and what happened to the owner of Cash App. So it's interesting. Both of these stories just happen to be connected. But this is one of the criticisms that Robert F. Kennedy is making right now about FedNow. He is very, I would say, very much an outspoken person. He really doesn't care what people think about him. And he is not one of these people that is a beloved Kennedy. You got to understand, I live in Massachusetts. I know about the Kennedy family. There are some that are very beloved, and he is not one of them. He is considered to be the black sheep of the family.
A CBDC tied to digital ID and social credit score will allow the government to freeze your assets or limit your spending to approved vendors if you fail to comply with arbitrary diktat, i.e. vaccine mandates. Officials boast the digital payment system will enable all the banks, any bank in the United States, not just the big ones, to offer instantly available funds in real time payments to their customers. All right. This is interesting to me. The fact that he is going to issues that are very different than kind of the vaccine issues that he has been talking about, and it made him very popular, frankly, in the context of COVID and the pandemic, I think speaks to why he has this popularity that the mainstream can't really wrap their hands around. He is finding issues that resonate with voters that are not talked about as much in the mainstream, that seem to tap into this fear of growing authoritarianism, which many people felt that the COVID policies, which weren't very well targeted to actually preventing the spread of COVID, many of them.
And this is exactly why I believe that he can win over people on the right. He can win over some independents because he is running on this anti-authoritarian message. And right now, some people, some Americans are not too happy about the fact that you had these Twitter files that were released that shows government overreach. Some Americans are not happy about the fact that it has become more and more revealing about the authoritarianism that we have from the US government. Some Americans are not happy about that. And if he runs on that message, I'm telling you right now, that can win over people on the other side. And that is going to be very scary to the establishment, very scary to networks like CNN and MSNBC. Marianne Williamson could have a significant struggle here. Significant struggle. Case in point, Danielle, I'm a right winger and I like him. The establishment will never allow. See what I was saying? How he can win over people on the other side? Let's go on.
Were a part of, and positioning himself as someone who, regardless of what the mainstream media is going to say about him, is willing to get between authoritarianism and the people. What do you make of this kind of approach and how people like Jake Tapper are framing his launch?
Yeah, well, I think the reason that RFK Jr. is able to launch a bid like this is exactly because of the way he's being treated by Jake Tapper. And that's not to say that I agree, because I think the label anti-vax, by the way, is fair to apply to him, because this is not just about the COVID vaccine. This is not about particular requirements for kids. I mean, he is against the measles vaccine as well. You know, he has a long history, decades going back, saying that all vaccines basically are dangerous and shouldn't be either encouraged or required. But I do think that the reason we're having this conversation is because the CDC and all of our public health authorities squandered all of their the trust of the American people on this particular COVID vaccine. They made really strong claims about it. They silenced people directly and indirectly through big tech companies who were raising questions about the vaccine. And I actually think, frankly, there's going to be a tragic consequence of this, which is once people lose trust in these institutions, and they're right to do so, then they go back and they start to question, for example, should my kids get the measles vaccine? I think that that's going to turn out really badly. But I ultimately think that the blame for that should rest with exactly people like Jake Tapper, because folks like him treated any questions about this new COVID vaccine, even as applied to 5-year-olds, as the equivalent of RFK Jr.'s long history, for example, on the measles vaccine. So I think that actually it is the institutions ultimately that are at fault here, as opposed to, because I don't think we'd be having this conversation before this pandemic. Do you?
Yeah, I think that's.
And this piece is very important. So he's challenging the institutions in place. And anybody running on that message right now, that can actually win over people. It's not just people on the right that had issues with the lockdowns and the mandates, especially those that lived in states that were locked down, just FYI. So challenging the institutions, which I think is very key, challenging the FBI, challenging the CIA, challenging the NSA, challenging big pharma. Mainstream media will see this as very dangerous. Don't be surprised if they block him out after this. But if he can get that message across, look, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knows a lot of people. He was a Kennedy. They have connections. If he can get that message across to millions and millions of Americans, 2024 is going to be interesting. That's why I think he should run as an independent, me personally. Let's go on.
That's a really good point. The crisis of confidence in traditional medical professionals has really opened the door for folks who have had longtime skepticism of vaccines and their potential harms. And the people who didn't want to potentially validate, I mean, you heard this a lot during COVID. You know, if you engage in COVID misinformation, you're going to undermine people's confidence in other vaccines, and kids aren't going to get their measles vaccinations anymore. We're going to see more outbreaks, the likes of which we've seen in some of these rather Tony elite
Marin County. I'm from the Bay Area, right? This was RFK Jr.'s original beat, was Marin County, right?
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi's district. But yeah, I think you're completely right. Once you sort of blow your credibility and silence people for asking really basic questions and equate them to to being against vaccines altogether, the way that more or less Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is. Although I will say one thing about this, it will be fun to have somebody on the presidential stage who has every reason to ask questions about the CIA.
Yeah.
Did you hear that piece? Pine says, Sabby, I'm sorry, but RFK Jr. will be ignored by MSM. They're already talking about him. They're already talking about him. Someone that can challenge the CIA. Now, will he make it on the debate stage? Probably not. Remember, Joe Biden does not have to debate Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. He doesn't have to. But if they do, you are going to see a strong difference between him and Marianne and Joe Biden. Now, Marianne has come forward in Glenn Greenwald's interview. She was asked about that, about those government agencies. And she said, well, yeah, I think there's reason to believe that they do, meddle. But the difference is RFK Jr. is very strong on that issue. He won't even say, I think they do meddle. No, he'll come flat out and say, let me tell you what these organizations do. You got to remember who he is. You got to remember the story about JFK and the information that's come out more recently about who killed JFK.
Yeah, look, I think that's a good point. And there are so many people who are voting right now who do just kind of want a proverbial bomb thrower like that. The idea, the appeal of an outsider is largely that even if you don't agree with some aspect of their platform, and I think that people are really going to have to wrap their head around this, there are going to be folks that support RFK. I experienced this with some of my listener base on my own show that's very left-leaning just last night. Even if people disagree with his stance on vaccines, even if people think it's even dangerous to say kids shouldn't be getting these routine vaccinations outside of the COVID context when they go to school, like measles vaccinations, they think it's worth it to have someone in the mix who could potentially have access to a debate stage and ask the kind of tough questions that establishment politicians don't want. People have made that case about the value of Marianne being in it, and this is no different. Let me ask you this, though. There has been talk about whether or not the Democratic Party is actually going to allow there to be debates when it was just Marianne and Biden.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on tonight. Nico House is coming on to my show tonight, along with Jill Stein. But Nico's going to come on and he's going to talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit. We need to revisit that. We need to revisit it because right now you do have two people that are primary challenging Joe Biden. And we all have to remember what happened to Bernie Sanders in reference to the DNC, how the DNC argued in court that they have the right to pick the candidates, how they had the right to do what they did. That's why Nico's coming on so we can revisit this, because Bree is 100% correct here. They can say that. The Democratic Party can say, nope, we're not going to have any debates. We have a Democrat sitting president who's running for re-election. we're just going to go with that. We're not even going to let you hear from Marianne or from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They can do that. This is why I continue to say we do not have a democracy in this country. When you hear politicians like Ro Khanna say we need to protect our democracy, Ro Khanna is not being honest with you, because we don't even have a real democracy. If we had a real democracy, the DNC would have lost that lawsuit. If we had a real democracy, third party and independent candidates wouldn't have to jump through hoops just to get a chance to be on the ballot, and they would be able to debate.
Is Marianne perceived to be relatively small potatoes such that the Democratic Party could get away with having a very anti-democratic non-primary season? Do you think someone like RFK Jr. being in the mix makes it more difficult for the Democrats to shut down the primary process?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think you would need somebody of a higher profile. I think this is the reason that I think it makes him easy to dismiss, and you can already see that the mainstream media is dismissing him. Now, maybe it's like Andrew Yang situation. Maybe he can build so much, so much of a following online. He can completely circumvent the sort of primary gatekeepers, if you will. But I just want to make one point to what we were talking about earlier. I think this comes down to actually treating people like adults. The second that you say you cannot ask that question, you cannot say that thing, we're not actually going to have a conversation like adults, like citizens, about any of these issues, then you lose people's trust in your right to do so, right? So their right to not trust you when you don't allow that kind of debate. So I really do think that the entire environment around COVID policies and vaccines in particular has had long-lasting consequences. I think we'll see it in the medical field. I think we'll see it in basically all other fields. I think people rightly don't trust what their politicians say, but that's been a long term. I mean, let's not lie. That's been forever that we can't trust what our politicians say, but we also can't trust increasingly what medical associations say, what academic studies say, right? There's a replication crisis. I think there's generally a crisis in trust in institutions, and I kind of think people are right to question it, even if I don't agree with every single conclusion that anyone could draw on the internet.
Yeah. And my thing is, I don't think he should run through the Democratic Party. I think he should run as an independent. I don't know why he's not doing this. Like, I really don't, because again, he's popular enough and has the name recognition to get support as an independent candidate. But I think, boy, when we talk about the political environment, don't be surprised if more people come forward and announce that they're running as well. Pine says RFK Jr. running as a Dem might give him more layers of protection against the crazy handlers of Sirhan. Maybe they would be scared to take out yet another Kennedy if that Kennedy is getting press. I don't know. Lloyd says, can he get on all the ballots? If he's running as a Democrat, he can. I mean, that's the thing. R.I.P. Shireen says he is no Jesse Ventura. No, he's not. He's not. He has been on Jimmy Dore's show a couple of times. I think Kim Iverson has also interviewed RFK Jr. If I were to interview him, I would seriously ask him why he is not running as an independent. At least I would. Given what we know about the two-party system, given what we know about the DNC fraud lawsuit, I would ask him, like, why even go through this? You know the system is rigged. You know the system is corrupt. Why even do this? But that's what I would ask him if given the opportunity to do so.